I do have a video to share with you today from a documentary that I'm going to link in the description of this video so that you can watch the rest of it. But before I do that, I want to go through a series of quotations just to lay a foundation for the argument that is going to be found in the video. And also the question we are answering as well is, should Seventh-day Adventists on our beloved church be supporting the climate change agenda? Is it something that God has called us to do? I'm going to have the conversation with you in the comment of this video. I'm not giving my final thoughts. We are simply going to talk below. Former President Barack Obama once stated, "There is one issue that will define the contours of this country more dramatically than any other, and that is the urgent threat of a changing climate." At the United Nations Climate Action Summit, Greta Thunberg in 2019 stated, "People are suffering, people are dying, entire ecosystems are collapsing, and we are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you?" Actor Leonardo DiCaprio also stated, "Climate change is severely impacting the threat of our planet and all of his inhabitants, and we must transition to a clean energy economy that does not rely on fossil fuels." Former President John Kerry also added, "Climate change is real. The science is compelling. And the longer we wait, the harder the problem will be to solve." Narendra Modi also stated, "Fighting climate change calls for innovation, cooperation, and willpower to make the changes that the world needs." The former Pope Francis had this to say, "On climate change, there is a clear, definitive, ineluctable, ethical imperative to act." Just a few years ago, the climate clock was posted in New York City, and it states we have about 4 years and 34 days left at the time of this recording before we face a climate disaster. This conversation about the climate change has gotten massive. Not only has it become political, environmentalists and also activists have gotten involved in this. Now the question is, how is this impacting even the church? To be more exact, the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Under the belief, we have the official statements of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and this one was stated regarding the dangers of climate change. Official statements, December 19th, 1995. Scientists warn that the gradual warming of the atmosphere as a result of human activity will have serious environmental consequences. The climate change resulting in more storms, more floods, and more droughts. To keep the climate within bearable limits, the emissions of green gases, especially carbon dioxide, CO2, need to be significantly reduced. Industrialized countries are the main source of these emissions, while the first victim are small island states and low-lying coastal countries. Despite the clear risk, government appears slow to act. The world membership of the Seventh-day Adventist Church requires that the government concerned take steps necessary to avert the danger. Are the three main calls that the Seventh-day Adventist Church is making in support of the climate change movement. Number one, by fulfilling the agreement reached in Rio de Janeiro in 1992 Convention to Climate Change, to stabilize carbon dioxide emissions by the year 2000 at 1990 levels. Number two, by establishing plans for further reductions in carbon dioxide emissions after the year 2000, and by initiating more forcefully public debate on the risk of climate change. The official statement went on to say, in signing this statement, Seventh-day Adventists declare that their advocacy of a simple, wholesome lifestyle and people do not step on a treadmill of unbridled consumerism and production of waste. They call for respect of creation and restraints in the use of the world's resources and revaluation of our needs as individuals. This statement was voted and approved by the General Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church Administrative Committee on December 19, 1995. But some people are very skeptical of these movements and asking some serious questions whether or not these things are being corrupted to bring about another agenda to control massive of individuals. In 2020, Lauren Siebold on AdventistToday.org wrote an article where he is speaking about the climate change situation. There he sought to explain and address some of the arguments that Adventists will also use to address the climate situation. He speaks about it's not happening. It doesn't matter that the world is ending anyway. It is a sign of the end. It's a way to introduce Sunday law. But as an opportunity for fleecing the fearful faithful, it was too good to pass up. The conspiracies turned it into that the Pope is using climate change as an excuse to get the world's government to institute Sunday laws. If only Pope Francis could know what a gift he gave to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. With one sentence, he raised not only just self-righteous ire, but millions of dollars for Seventh-day Adventist evangelists. Now, the truth is, in Pope Francis' writing, there certainly was statement there to support the climate change movement as an effort to push forward Sunday laws. And the truth is, it was being used and is still being used as a means to put forward Sunday laws. However, this is not to say the issue of climate change and everything about it is bad. There are some levels of responsibility that we have as far as addressing the issue. It speaks about the value of stewardship, how God has given us the ability to take care of those things that are within our cares and our means, and he expects us to take care of them, just as he did for Adam and Eve. I am okay with that. I don't have an issue with that in particular. But now I'm still asking the question, the reality of climate change. What is the truth behind the story? You read a number of quotations, number of articles. We said a few things here and there, but this is the history that is oftentimes overlooked in most of the conversations as well. While there are some things certainly that we can talk about and should by all means support when it comes to this issue of climate change. However, there is a part of that idea that is being hijacked and used and abused to bring about agendas that has nothing to do with climate change whatsoever. In the documentary, The Agenda, Their Visions and Your Future, we are going to play a segment from there talking about the history of the climate change, where it came from, why are we dealing with that today, where is it possibly going. But students of Bible prophecy already know exactly what is stated in the Word of God, as well as the spirit of prophecy, how certain good elements and systems, institutions can take that which is good and use it to bring about an evil agenda. And Satan is behind the scene finding ways to bring about control and centralizing power and to persecute the people of God in the end. For this reason, we must be on guard and thoughtful and paying attention to these ideas and be prayerful as we talk on this subject as well. Now, let's take a listen to this video.
Your compliance is vital to the agenda. To impose global solutions, the leadership needs you to believe in global problems.
Climate change is here, it is terrifying, and it is just the beginning. The era of global warming has ended, the era of global boiling has arrived.
This stuff is so fantastically stupid. It's hard to believe that they're doing it. There is no climate emergency. That is a total scam. If they came out and said, hey, we want to destroy your economy, we want to destroy the middle class of your country, and then ultimately we want to make you a slave to a one world government, it just wouldn't be as appealing as saying we're trying to save the planet for future generations.
(2024) with the hottest day on record and the hottest months on record, this is almost certain to be the hottest year on record. And the masterclass in climate destruction.
Statements such as that are amplified by emotional footage from all over the world. But is any of it true?
I do not think there's a climate crisis, and I base that on all the evidence and the climate data sets that we build to answer questions just like that. We actually use satellites to monitor the global temperature, the true global temperature of the atmosphere. And we find there is a rise. It's about 1.5 degrees per century, which is certainly something that's manageable and the Earth has seen before. Compared to the 19th century, which was about the coolest century in the past 10,000 years, we're warmer. But we're about the same as we were 1,000 years ago, and certainly cooler than we were about 5,000 to 8,000 years ago.
John Christie is a highly regarded climate scientist who developed the measurement of accurate temperature records using satellites. His evidence is critically inconvenient to the climate change industry.
I'm not popular in most of the climate community, that's for sure, because much of the climate community depends on climate model results. Tens and hundreds of millions of dollars have gone into that industry of climate modeling, and I show, well, you folks have failed. But yet they prop up the entire political world that tends to support this. In 2017, I came to work and there were 7 bullet holes in our office suite. And so some people are pretty upset that the evidence that we build and show that can stand the test of time and can stand up to cross-examination is just not going along with their issues and their desires.
So let's consider these statistics on the Earth's atmosphere. 78% is nitrogen, 21% oxygen, other gases make up less than 1%, and carbon dioxide accounts for a mere 0.04%, the majority of which is natural. Can man-made CO2 really be a problem?
Roy Spencer and I are going on the assumption that all the warming that you see is due to carbon dioxide emissions. And so we find that that's a pretty modest warming. But see, that's a big assumption. Mother Nature is able to warm up the planet without extra CO2. And so we are just saying the worst case scenario is this warming of about 1.5 degrees. And that's certainly not a catastrophe at all.
On the contrary, carbon dioxide is vital for the world's survival. The greater the concentration, the better plants grow. In fact, according to NASA figures, the world has become 14% greener in the last 40 years.
During the last cool period before industrialization, let's say 200 years ago or so, it was below 300 parts per million. And during the ice ages, it was even lower. And that's a dangerous level because plants struggle to survive when the CO2 is at a low level. And so the biosphere becomes less diverse and less available to support the animal life. So low CO2 is not good for the planet as a whole.
Where is the logic then behind the UK's decision to spend £22 billion on facilities to capture carbon? The greatest controversy of all revolves around readings from ice cores. CO2 levels can be measured in bubbles of air trapped in ice thousands of years ago. By aligning this to temperatures, scientists have argued that carbon dioxide is the cause of global warming. However, closer inspection leads to the opposite conclusion.
Once the temperature starts to rise, you will see the carbon dioxide rise about 500 to 1,000 years after. So the CO2 actually lags the temperature changes.
But what of the extreme weather events, which are increasing and driven by climate change, according to everyone from the top of the United Nations down? Professor Christie says there is no data to support those claims.
And what we find is that virtually every one of these claims is false. The extremes are not increasing. Hurricanes are not increasing in intensity or frequency. Same with tornadoes or thunderstorms or floods or droughts. It's just going along like it always has with the natural variability.
Why aren't we looking at the surface data sets that are constantly adjusted upwards? Why aren't we looking at the 40.3 record at Conisbee, which the Met Office is very proud of, on July the 19th in 2022? And when we did a freedom of information request at the Daily Skeptic, we found that there were 3 Typhoon jets landing on a runway next to the measuring device, because Conisbee, as they call it, is actually RAF Conisbee. It's a military airport. The temperature lasted for 60 seconds. Sticking a thermometer up the backside of a jet aircraft is not probably scientifically the best place that you can sort of determine temperature measurement, particularly when you then morph it into a global database, which the Met Office has, and then tell dear old Antonio Gutierrez that the globe is boiling. The whole thing is junk.
How we came to the point where we think that we're going to prevent bad weather from happening by eliminating fossil fuels is just about the most nonsensical, illogical thing that I can imagine. And the whole world is caught up in this nonsense.
So how did the carbon story take hold? Meet the man who invented climate change, according to The Telegraph. His name? Maurice Strong, an oil tycoon, a Rockefeller associate, and a man with an extraordinary talent for moving between high finance, politics, and the United Nations. Strong was a member of the highly influential Club of Rome, an institution formed in 1968 at a Rockefeller property on Lake Como in Italy. A group of scientists, academics, and industrialists discussed what they saw as an urgent crisis: the impact of human activity on the planet.
I don't think we can sustain current growth trends much beyond, say, the lives of children who are being born today.
To prove the thesis, they commissioned computer modelling at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. This research laid the foundations for an agenda that's persisted for over 50 years.
Cut use of autos, use less electric power, have fewer children, limit growth.
All of this was fueling this ideology that there's too many people on the planet, there's not enough resources, and that something has to be done.
The natural world in which man lives and on which he depends is indeed deteriorating, is being destroyed in many instances at a rate that is accelerating and that can only continue to accelerate unless we begin to control the activities that are having this destructive impact.
In 1975, the Club of Rome published a second report, Mankind at the Turning Point. The lead quotation was telling.
The world has cancer, and the cancer is man.
The report concluded,
the solution of these crises can be developed only in a global context with full and explicit recognition of the emerging world system, a new world economic order, and a global resources allocation system.
In other words, technocracy, top-down control of everything, including populations. But if that was the solution, a worldwide problem was required. Climate change provided the answer, as admitted in a later Club of Rome document.
This is the quote from page 115. In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. All these dangers are caused by human intervention, and it is only through changed attitudes and behaviour that they can be overcome. The real enemy, then, is humanity itself. It really does look as though they are inventing climate change there.
They just made it up out of thin air, literally. That nobody really looks at that book and say, well, there you go. This has nothing to do with science whatsoever. They just made it up.
Interestingly, in 1988, Maurice Strong had been instrumental in establishing the IPCC, the mainly political entity which endorsed a thesis by a small group of scientists that industrial carbon dioxide was driving climate change, and the IPCC has been locked into that theory ever since. Maurice Strong's masterstroke came in 1992, when as Secretary-General of the UN's Earth Summit in Brazil, he saw 179 nations commit to a World Action Plan, Agenda 21.
We have been the most successful species ever. We are now a species out of control.
Nobody would question the need for a cleaner environment and the protection of nature, and Strong's legacy lives on through the Kyoto Protocol, the Paris Accord, the current Agenda 2030, and the worldwide push for carbon net zero. But there are questions on his motives and his connections. He was behind the first financial carbon market and a founding director of the World Economic Forum. Surely a conflict of interests with his involvement in the IPCC. A skeptic might ask why nearly all research grants in almost 40 years have gone on developing IPCC carbon dioxide theories, while anyone who raises questions is ridiculed, cancelled, or has their career stalled.
Funding for someone who wants to determine the natural variability of the climate system as an explanation for what has happened is just not there. I mean, the government is very clear that they want a catastrophic story.
There is no single science paper that proves conclusively that humans control all or most of the global climate. If there was, you wouldn't hear the last of it. Instead, we get this call to authority to the IPCC, the United Nations Panel on Climate Change.
Many more scientists and academics are speaking out against the IPCC. Almost 2,000 have signed a declaration stating that there is no climate emergency, including Nobel Prize winner Professor John Clauser, who wrote,
The popular narrative about climate change reflects a dangerous corruption of science that threatens the world's economy and the well-being of billions of people.
We need to have a full and honest debate about the science. It needs to be discussed in Parliament, it needs to be discussed in the media, it needs to be generally discussed, and we need to sort of bring the drains up, if you like, on all of the science to see what is there really a threat.
That debate is highly unlikely, because the juggernaut of net zero careers on, with trillions at stake. What is certain is that the repercussions will affect the food we eat, ravage our countryside, and have a disastrous impact on our energy supply.
If you cannot set a credible course for net zero, with 2025 and 2030 targets covering all your operations, you should not be in business.
Well, net zero is insanity. It's pure insanity. I mean, the idea that you can remove 85% of the world's energy, which comes from hydrocarbons, within less than 30 years and replace it with the sunbeams and the breezes, it shows a complete lack of economics, societal effect. It shows a simple lack of the progress that we've made over 300 years.
Nevertheless, net zero is enshrined in UK law, with the government passing the Climate Change Act in 2008. A 100% reduction in emissions by 2050 from 1990 levels was included later in a strategy document. But experts argue that the policy is fatally flawed.
Europe's mad dash towards net zero is effectively economic suicide. Politicians are purposely impoverishing ordinary people, purposely deindustrializing Europe, where companies are forced to move to countries where they have access to cheap energy, whether it's the US who frack and therefore have cheap gas, or whether it's to China, which is still predominantly producing from non-renewable, especially coal. It is literal economic suicide.
China continues to open new coal-fired power stations to drive the factories that manufacture wind turbines and solar panels, which are then sold to the West. As a result, China emits almost 30% of global greenhouse gases, while the UK is responsible for less than 1%. In essence, carbon emissions are merely transferred to another part of the planet, and while China gets richer, UK households face a bleak and expensive future.
What it will effectively do is price ordinary people out of having access to electricity at a time they want, and a price they can afford.
The core problem is that neither the infrastructure nor the technology exist to provide a constant supply of electricity.
The proportion of time that solar actually generates electricity is actually 9% in the UK. That means that for 90% of the time, solar doesn't generate the average amount of electricity that its capacity can generate. For onshore wind, it's about 20 to 40%, and for offshore wind, it's about 30 to 50%. So that means, by definition, you will always have periods of time when renewables aren't producing electricity, but there is demand for electricity.
As we'll hear, the net result is that supply will be rationed. Reality, though, seems not to concern the activists.
I look at some of these hysterical youngsters and some of the hysterical oldsters as well, screaming about the climate is collapsing and all that sort of thing. And you think you haven't got a clue what would happen if you removed hydrocarbons. You haven't got a clue. You'd be back in service, like probably your ancestors were. You'd be skivvying on the land, in big houses with warlords, calling themselves aristocracy and all that sort of stuff. You want to go back to that? Fine, get rid of hydrocarbons.
Many of these apparently grassroots protest groups are backed by organisations such as the Climate Emergency Fund, financed by billionaires like the oil heiress Aileen Getty. And if they claim to be environmentalists, they conveniently ignore the bigger picture. Thousands of wind turbines are disrupting coastal waters, changing habitats, affecting marine life, and killing seabirds. Landscapes are being scarred by the production of lithium for electric car batteries, and by cobalt mines in Africa, where child labour contributes to huge corporate profits. How does the loss of thousands of square miles of farmland to vast solar parks meet the UN's biodiversity goal? And how helpful are wind turbines when they're blotting the landscape visually and through noise pollution, and disrupting wildlife in the air and on the ground? The glorious mountain terrain of southwest Wales is a stark example. It's a landscape breathtaking in its beauty, untainted and largely untouched by humans. A haven for wildlife, a place where life runs its natural course. Yet this is what's planned. Mega turbines designed for offshore, reaching 700 feet into the air and dwarfing the hilltop forests. Planning permission is being sought for the so-called Bryn Cadwyn Energy Park.
If you put one in the valley floor, it would be standing some 40 metres above the valley floor, so above the horizon. But they're not putting them in the valley floor, they're putting them on the top of the hills. So it'll be standing some 600 odd metres above sea level up there, casting a shadow over our solar panels.
Justin Cotter lives right in the centre of the proposed development. He's fighting to preserve the countryside he loves. And across the mountain, Jason and Josie Barker are equally aggrieved.
It feels very much like it's exploitation, using the climate crisis narrative as its supporting evidence, so it feels like it's being abused in a tremendous way, and there's going to be a lot of destruction done in the name of doing good, which really just seems utterly backwards. And if we really want to protect nature, then some of the best way of doing that would be to leave it well alone, especially in the wilder places, and let it flourish. We certainly found that being here. The more we've lived here, the more we've worked with it and encouraged it, the more it's come back. All of those spruce trees on top there, they will have to go to make way for turbines. All of that. All of this spruce will be gone.
To build a 230 metre turbine in that location, it's going to take some crane to lift the 240-ton nacelle onto the top of the tower, some 180 metres up. So they'd have to stabilise all the ground for the crane, stabilise the ground for the actual turbine, put in a concrete plug basically in the ground of some 1,000 tonne of steel, 4,000 tonne of concrete, just as a base.
They'll need to be lit. It'll take away the dark skies.
It's totally devastating. It would just be catastrophic damage and destruction.
The roadways up through these valleys, they're Welsh valleys, they're all twists and turns. They're going to have to straighten out the valleys. Where you've got steep hills, they're going to have to level out those hills. There's a 200 metre drop into the actual valley itself. So they're going to have to create gradients that machinery carrying 400 tonne loads can actually traverse and get up.
The locals argue that there are much better ways of creating clean energy, such as solar panels on industrial sites. Areas of natural beauty should be respected.
This is about preserving and protecting this sacred land. We need to speak up and protect the environment.
It's just tremendous amount of damage in the name of saving the planet. It does make you ask the question of what is it we're actually saving if we're paving it over. It doesn't make any sense at all in my head.